The Fable Archive, Record VIII. Case file, The Maw in the Hills, primary. Subject, the shepherd boy. Identity corrupted across drafts, name redacted in older versions. Secondary subject, the wolf. Entity classification, unknown. Sound-based predator. Status, hillside topography unstable. Recorded howls echo without source. Mouth-shaped caves increasing in number. Archivist warning, do not answer if something calls your name from underground. Welcome to Twilight Fables. In the old hills beyond the village where the stones tilt like broken teeth and the grass grows in restless, shivering patterns, there lived a shepherd boy whose name is smudged out of every remaining record. His family insisted it was simple misfortune of ink, dampness, wind-worn pages, careless archivists. But older villagers, those who kept their doors bolted even on cloudless afternoons, muttered that names vanish for a reason. They whispered that the hills did not like being watched, and they disliked being named even more. The boy was young, bright, eager to prove himself. He had inherited his father's flock after a winter sickness took the man in silence, as though frost reached into his lungs while he slept and refused to let go. The boy led the sheep up the slopes every morning, listening to the wind move across the land with an odd cadence. It was not the whistling breeze common to high places, but a shifting sound, deeper, resonant almost, breathing. He ignored it at first, chalking it up to the strange acoustics the hills were known for. Travelers often complained that the area distorted footsteps, doubled voices, scattered echoes so wildly that you sometimes heard yourself speaking from a place you hadn't been. Still, the boy liked the solitude. He liked that with each dawn, the woolen backs of the sheep turned silver in the new light, and he liked that the rest of the world seemed small from this vantage point. Yet even from the beginning there were warning signs, details easy to miss but impossible to forget once noticed. The first happened on a cool evening when he lingered on the hillside later than usual. The flock had grazed close to a cluster of dark openings in the slope, caves he didn't remember seeing before. When he approached them, intending to guide the sheep away, the air rushing from inside felt warm, damp, strangely rhythmic, almost as if the cave was exhaling. He stepped back quickly, and the sheep bleated nervously in unison. He returned home with the feeling of being watched from behind, though nothing followed him but the long stretching shadows of the hills. The villagers noticed the caves, too. A week later, a group of men gathered at the tavern, arguing about whether they had always been there. Some insisted they had never seen them in their childhood. Others claimed that strange noises had begun echoing at night, low, drawn-out calls that sounded like wolves, yet lacked the wild, sharp cry wolves were known for. These were deeper, almost mournful, and they seemed to come from beneath the earth rather than from the forests. The boy overheard these worries but dismissed them. Wolves were a convenient fear, one that made sense in a place where sheep grazed freely and small livestock often went missing. But the boy's flock remained untouched, and he took this as proof that the concerns were exaggerated. This changed on the morning he heard his own name whispered from the ground. He had fallen asleep against a rock while the sheep drifted farther up the hill. He woke to a faint voice brushing against his ear, soft, coaxing, almost childlike. It said his name with surprising clarity, though the soil beneath him barely stirred. He stood quickly, heart pounding, scanning the empty slopes for a culprit. But there was no one in sight. Only the caves sat quietly, their mouths appearing slightly wider than before. When he told his mother that evening, she struck him gently across the cheek, not in anger, but fear. "Do not repeat that," she said. "Not to anyone, not even to yourself." He didn't understand, but he nodded. That night he woke to the sound of tapping beneath the floorboards. 3 soft knocks, then silence, then 3 more, almost curious. When he pressed his ear to the boards, he heard breathing. The hills themselves were shifting. Days passed, and the caves multiplied. At first it was only 1 or 2 more. Then, dozen. Within a month, the hillside looked diseased with openings, oval, jagged, lined with ridges of stone that resembled teeth worn down by centuries of erosion. No one approached them anymore. Even the sheep avoided them, forming tight clusters and bleating anxiously whenever the wind blew from the direction of the caves. The boy tried to keep the flock away, but the hills were changing faster than he could lead. One afternoon, as he climbed to the ridge, he heard a low hum. Not the wind, not distant thunder. It was a voice carried through soil and stone, disassembled and reassembled by the ground until it sounded warped, layered, wrong. It didn't say words the first time. It only sang. He froze where he stood, the hum vibrating through his ribs as though trying to resonate inside him. The sheep panicked, scattering in all directions. He ran after them, shouting over the humming that grew louder, rising from the caves like heat. Eventually, he gathered the flock and guided them home, but not before he saw something move in one of the larger openings. A shape, tall and thin, its silhouette rippling as if made of mist or sound rather than flesh. The next day he lied and told the villagers he had seen a wolf. This was the moment the first cry entered the unofficial record. The boy claimed a wolf lurked on the hillside, stalking the flock. The villagers responded predictably. They grabbed torches and rushed to the slopes, only to find nothing. No tracks, no scent, no wolf. They returned irritated, muttering that the boy was seeking attention, playing games, wasting their time. But the boy had not intended mischief. He did not want to tell them what he actually saw, because he sensed that words would make it stronger. Something about the entity thrived on being known. That night he dreamed of tunnels lined with throats, of echoes pulling themselves into the shape of animals, of vibrations coiling like snakes beneath the soil. He woke drenched in sweat to the sound of a howl, long, rich, layered with dozens of voices, a sound with no single origin, a sound that tasted like metal. The next day, desperate not to face the hills alone, he cried wolf again. This time the villagers were angrier. They accused him of lying, of creating panic. One man grabbed his collar and shook him, insisting the boy grow up and stop making fools of them. But the boy only whispered, "It's not a wolf." The man froze. What then? The boy could not answer. He had no word for the thing in the caves. Over the following days, the entity's calls changed. They stopped resembling howls and began mimicking voices. Twice the boy heard his mother calling him from deep inside the hillside, though she was at home both times. Once he heard the voice of a villager who had died years prior, calling for help from beneath a mound of trembling soil. Another time he heard his own voice echoing across the field, pleading with himself to run. And the caves kept widening, shifting, appearing in new configurations as though rearranging themselves into a pattern he could not decipher. The boy grew frantic, lonely, terrified. He begged the villagers to help him guard the flock, insisting something was coming. They laughed at him now. Children imitated his cries for sport. Adults turned away when he approached. His mother avoided the conversation entirely, staring at the hills with haunted dread whenever the wind blew from their direction. Only the old archivist listened. A frail, ink-stained man with failing eyesight, he cornered the boy outside the tavern and asked him to repeat everything he had seen and heard. The boy described the voices, the caves, the hum in the soil. The archivist pressed trembling fingers to his temples. "It's the maw," he whispered. "The hills are waking again." But when the boy demanded what that meant, the archivist shook his head violently. "I said nothing. Forget it. Forget this place. Leave if you can." The boy couldn't. His flock depended on him, and he felt tethered to the hills in a way he didn't understand. Something had chosen him. Something had waited for him. The third cry came on a day when the sky was unnervingly still. No breeze, no birdsong, no movement. The grass lay flat, as though pinned by an unseen hand. The boy felt the change immediately, a pressure at the base of his skull, a trembling under his feet. He didn't mean to scream. The sound tore out of him instinctively as he saw the largest cave splitting wider, reshaping into a gaping mouth-like fissure, ridges flexing like gums disturbed after a long sleep. "Wolf!" he shouted, because it was the only word he had. But this time no one came. He shouted again, voice raw, throat burning. The hills answered with a soft echo, his own voice calling back. And then another version of his voice. Then another, layering until the air was thick with repetitions of his own cry, mocking him like a chorus of unseen selves. He stumbled backward, tripping over a stone. The flock scattered again, and this time he couldn't gather them. The echoes chased him down the slope, whispering things he could not bear to hear, half-formed sentences, shredded memories, fragments of lullabies his mother used to sing, each twisted by the hillside's voice. He fled home, trembling so violently his teeth chattered. His mother barred the door and held him against her chest until the echoes faded into the night, but they did not fade for long. That midnight, the tapping beneath the house began again, More insistent this time, urgent, almost annoyed. The boards bowed slightly with each knock. His mother wept silently, clutching a scrap of old parchment inked with protective runes from another village. But the boy could tell even she didn't believe they would help. When dawn came, something tugged at him. A pull, not physical, but compelling, like a remembered promise. He found himself walking toward the hills before he even had his boots on properly. The caves awaited him, their yawning forms glistening with morning dew that slid down their stone ridges like saliva. The sheep were nowhere to be found. The air smelled of damp earth and something faintly metallic. As he stepped onto the slope, the ground vibrated gently. The humming returned, deeper now, resonating through his bones until his vision flickered. He stumbled forward, drawn toward the largest cave. Halfway there, he heard it, a voice that was not his own, but wore his tone like a mask. It called his name, calm, patient, certain he would obey. The boy froze, shaking. He remembered his mother's warning, the archivist's fear, the villagers' disbelief, the shifting landscape, the voices that weren't voices. And still, something in him wanted to answer. Something wanted to step closer to the mouth-shaped cave and lean in. The hills waited. The cave breathed, and the voice said his name again. The boy did not answer the voice, not with words at least, but his silence did not break the connection. If anything, it deepened it. The hills seemed to sense hesitation the way a predator scents blood. The soil shifted beneath his feet in slow, deliberate ripples, like something vast and patient stretching beneath a thin blanket of earth. He took a single step backward, but the reverberation that followed pulsed upward through his legs, urging him forward again. It wasn't force, not physical force, but persuasion. A suggestion that being closer would make everything clearer. A promise of understanding. The boy clenched his jaw and whispered, "No." The voice repeated the word instantly, echoing it from the dark, as though trying on the refusal like a new coat. No, no, no. Each version grew softer, warmer, more like his own voice spoken gently. A kindness, a coaxing. His breath shook. He turned and ran, not daring to look back until the hills dipped behind the tree line. Only then did he collapse to his knees, trembling. But even as he knelt, he felt it. That slight hum gnawing at the edge of his hearing, not receding with distance, following him, tracking him, calling him in ways the ears weren't made to perceive. For days after, he refused to return to the slopes. His mother wept with relief. The sheep, what remained of them, bleated in the abandoned paddock, restless in their confinement. The villagers were relieved too, relieved not to hear the boy's shouts anymore, relieved to imagine the hills settling back into their familiar silence. But the silence was false. A waiting, a pause before the next inhale. The boy lay awake at night, listening to the tapping beneath the floorboards. Always 3 knocks. Always slow. Always patient. It reminded him of someone who had forgotten the rhythm of knocking and was trying to learn it again by imitation. Each time the sound came, his mother gripped his hand tightly in the darkness. "Don't listen," she whispered, "and whatever it says next, you must not answer." But the boy had already heard something worse than knocking. The whispers had begun again, weaving through the cracks in the walls even when the wind outside was still. Sometimes they were faint murmurs. Sometimes they were soft calls. And sometimes they were words, sentences spoken in his own voice, but in a rhythm he would never use. The worst was the night he heard it say, "I'm cold." He sat upright in bed, heart hammering, breath tight. The voice repeated the words, this time from beneath the floorboards. "I'm cold." His mother clapped her hands over her ears and rocked back and forth. She knew better than to speak, but tears streamed down her cheeks. The boy shut his eyes and tried to pretend it wasn't happening, tried to pretend the hills weren't talking to him, but they were, and they were becoming impatient. The following afternoon, the old archivist returned. He knocked on their door with trembling knuckles and entered without waiting for permission. His eyes were red-rimmed, as though he had not slept in days. "The caves have multiplied," he said without preamble. 37 new openings recorded this morning alone. 4 of them were not there at dawn. The boy swallowed hard. What does it want? The archivist's mouth twitched as though the answer pained him. It wants a witness, a herald, a voice to carry its hunger outward. The boy shook violently. I don't want to. Wanting has nothing to do with it, the archivist whispered. You called for help, and it learned from your voice. The boy's breath caught. I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't matter. Echoes only need sound, not meaning. His mother reached for the archivist's cloak. Can you help him? Please. You must know something. The archivist shut his eyes tightly. There are old notes, barely legible, speaking of a shepherd long ago who was chosen by the maw. They say it lives in the bedrock, not as a creature, but as an emptiness that dreams of shape. It mimics what it hears until its echoes become more real than the originals. The boy's stomach twisted. What happened to the shepherd? The archivist only shook his head. Silence. Heavy, final silence. The boy understood. The maw took him. The maw used him. The maw consumed his name until none remembered it, until even the records blurred it out. And now the maw had chosen again. That night, the ground beneath the house did not knock. It sighed, a long, low exhale that bowed the floorboards inward. His mother covered her mouth, fighting a scream. The boy sat frozen, staring at the wooden planks beneath his feet as dust sifted up between them, stirred by the breath of something impossibly large. He did not sleep. By dawn, he was shaking, hollow-eyed. Something inside him cracked, the part of him that believed hiding would help. So he went back to the hills, not bravely, just exhausted. The slopes rose before him like a beast crouched in patience. Mouth-shaped caves yawned across the landscape, dozens, maybe hundreds now, each glistening with dew, each warm with that same strange exhalation. The boy stepped onto the hillside, and the ground greeted him with a subtle vibration. He felt it through his bones like a cord plucked deep within the earth. The voice rose again, soft at first. A humming. Not words. Not yet. Then it shifted into something closer to speech, layered, harmonized like many voices learning to speak together as one. The boy, the boy, the boy. He flinched. Stop, he whispered. But the hills repeated his whisper immediately. Stop, stop. Stop. He covered his ears. Leave me alone. 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 The echoes trailed off into a moan that sounded wounded. No, disappointed. The ground trembled faintly with the emotion. He stumbled back, but did not flee. The maw didn't want him running. It wanted him listening. Understanding. And that was the moment he realized something terribly simple. It was not calling him to kill him. It needed him. The thought chilled him more deeply than death ever could. He turned slowly, looking at the multitude of cave mouths, some small, some enormous, all facing him, all waiting. What do you want? He whispered. The echoes did not repeat this time. Instead, a new sound rippled across the slope. A howl. Not a wolf's howl. Something deeper. A layered vibration resonating through stone, soil, air, and bone. It carried no threat, only hunger, only longing. Then, beneath the howl, he heard the unmistakable bleating of sheep. His sheep, the ones that had vanished. But they didn't bleat normally. They bleated in harmony with the hillside's voice, as though their sounds were being shaped by the earth itself. He moved without thinking, drawn to the largest cave. As he approached, he expected darkness. Instead, he saw light, pale, pulsing, like moonlight diffused through fog. The hum intensified, vibrating his ribs, guiding his steps. He stood before the cave mouth, heart pounding so loudly it seemed to sync with the earth's rhythm. I'm not your voice, he whispered. The cave breathed out, warm and vast. Then a new voice emerged, not his own this time, not the maw's echo. His mother's voice, calling his name, terrified, pleading. He spun around. She was nowhere on the slope. The voice came from behind him, inside the cave. He took one step closer, then another. The hillside hummed encouragingly, like a teacher praising a hesitant student. Just as the cave's light touched his skin, a hand seized his shoulder. He jolted violently and nearly screamed. It was the archivist, wild-eyed, panting. Don't go in, the old man rasped. The boy shook. It has my mother. It has her voice, the archivist corrected sharply. That is not the same thing. The hills groaned at his defiance. The cave's light dimmed, then brightened abruptly like a wide-open eye. The archivist spun toward it. No more witnesses, he whispered to himself. Not again. He shoved a brittle scroll into the boy's hands. Its ink was warped, smeared by age and dampness. This was written by the shepherd before you, he said. The one whose name is gone. He realized too late. The boy's fingers trembled as he unrolled the fragment. Only a few lines remained legible. It learns the voice. Then it becomes the voice. Then it replaces the voice. And once you answer, you are already inside it. The archivist grabbed the boy's face with trembling hands. You must resist. Don't let it shape you. The cave exhaled sharply, as though insulted. A low, angry moan rippled through the earth. The ground pitched under their feet. Run, the archivist whispered. The boy hesitated. What about you? I've heard it too long already. The hills shuddered. Something deep inside them shifted, rising, opening. The archivist began to shake violently, clutching his head. It's calling me, he gasped. The boy tried to drag him toward the village, but the old man pulled away. Go, he shouted, voice cracking under some unseen weight. The boy's breath broke. He stumbled backward, then he ran. He ran as the hills roared, not loudly but deeply, like a drumbeat from inside the world itself. He ran as the archivist's silhouette staggered toward the cave, drawn like iron to a magnet. He ran as the hillside's hum shifted into something new, a voice wearing his own mother's tears. Come back, please, come back. He did not look over his shoulder. When he reached the village, he slammed into the first house he saw, collapsing in the dirt, sobbing. His mother rushed to him, gathering him in her arms. What happened? He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The ground beneath them quivered faintly, a gentle ripple. Listening, waiting. The villagers emerged from their homes, alarmed by the tremors. They stared toward the hills. Some screamed, some fell to their knees. The caves, hundreds of them, glowed with the pale breathlight, all facing the village, all opening wider, and then they heard it. A howl carried on the wind, not a wolf, not human, a resonance that tasted like their own voices being swallowed. The maw had learned enough. It was done waiting. The hills did not rush toward the village. Their hunger had never been the kind that lunged. Instead, the maw beneath them breathed steadily, deeply, with the patience of something that had waited centuries for its voice to be understood. The pale glow spilling from the cave mouths brightened until the entire slope pulsed like a massive throat lit from within. The villagers stumbled back, shielding their eyes, clinging to one another. The boy clutched his mother's sleeve, gasping for breath, trembling so violently his teeth ached. The archivist was gone. The hills had claimed him, and the boy knew without needing to see, that the maw was now weaving the archivist's voice into its collection. The ground whispered beneath the villagers' feet. Not words, not yet, but shifting pulses of vibration that made the earth feel alive, as though something enormous was adjusting its position far below. The boy whispered hoarsely, "We need to run." His mother gripped his face with shaking hands. "Where, child? Where can we run from the ground itself?" He had no answer. The villagers gathered around them, their faces pale in the flickering glow. Some stared upward at the hills, transfixed. Others prayed. Others argued, insisting it was a trick or a natural earthquake or a shared hallucination. But the boy knew none of those words fit. Nothing natural hummed in harmony with human breath. Nothing natural learned voices one by one. Nothing natural rearranged the land so that the mouths in the hills now faced the village like a row of listening heads. The boy tried to speak, to warn them, to explain what he had seen. But before he could form the words, the maw spoke first. A roar of silence swept over the village. Not loudness, absence. Every bird cry, every distant rustle of wind, every human breath was swallowed instantly, as if the air itself had been scooped clean. The villagers gasped in terror, but their fear made no sound. Their mouths opened, but the silence devoured each word before it existed. The boy clutched his throat in horror. It felt as though something vast pressed gently against the world, flattening sound itself. A moment later, the silence snapped. And all at once, the village was filled with voices that did not belong to the living. The archivist's voice rose first, broken, thin, stretched into unnatural chords. His warnings repeated again and again in a tone of despair, twisted into hunger, a litany of regret pulled apart and reassembled. Don't answer. Don't listen. Don't answer. The villagers shrieked, clapping their hands to their ears as the voice multiplied, overlapping itself in endless, nauseating echoes. Then came others, the voices of people long dead, the voices of people who had never existed, and worst of all, the voices of the villagers themselves, calling out from the caves, perfectly mimicked, pleading for help from deep within the hills. The boy's own voice rose among them, crying for rescue, begging to be found. He staggered backward, dizzy. "It's copying us," he whispered. "All of us." His mother grabbed his wrist. "We have to hide." "No." The boy shook violently. "The maw doesn't need doors. It doesn't break into houses. It just waits." The villagers began to panic. Some ran for the woods, some ran for their homes, some fell to their knees, wailing as the hillside's voices grew louder and louder, blending into a sound that wasn't quite a scream but wasn't quite a song either. Something in between. A sound that tried to crawl inside your head and make itself comfortable. The boy's breath stuttered. He knew this wasn't an attack, not yet. This was communication. This was the maw teaching the village how to listen. And he understood suddenly, horribly, that this was his fault. If he had not cried out for help, if he had kept his voice to himself, the maw might never have learned the shape of human longing. It might never have realized how deeply people listened when they believed a child was in danger. His mother dragged him away from the crowd. "We're leaving," she said, voice trembling. "We'll go to the next village. We'll warn them. We'll—" She froze mid-sentence. The boy felt her hand tighten around his wrist with crushing pressure. He turned to look at her and saw her staring blankly at the hills, her lips parted, eyes wide and empty. "Mama?" he whispered. Her voice answered at once, but not from her throat, from everywhere, from the soil, from the caves, from beneath their feet. Her voice whispered his name with a warmth that did not belong in terror. The boy felt the world tilt. His mother collapsed to her knees, shaking her head violently as if trying to shake something out of her mind. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." But the maw had learned her voice now, and it used it. The villagers screamed as the echoes multiplied. The boy heard a dozen versions of his mother's pleas coming from the hillside, each layered with unnatural harmony. He pulled her to her feet. "We have to go now." She stumbled but followed, leaning heavily on him. They pushed through the frantic villagers, through the narrow streets toward the road leading south. The hills loomed behind them, their glowing mouths widening. The voices rose, shaking the air. And then, something changed. A new voice joined the chorus, a voice the boy recognized instantly, with a pain so sharp it blinded him. The archivist. But different, no longer pleading, no longer warning, whispering one soft sentence with absolute clarity. "The door is open." The earth trembled. The boy felt the vibration travel through the soles of his feet and up his spine. He turned slowly, dread hollowing him from the inside. The largest cave, the one that had nearly swallowed him days before, was stretching, growing, its stone ridges retracting like lips peeling back to reveal a deeper, darker void. The glow inside it pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, or a throat preparing to speak. And then the maw exhaled. A wind of warm, damp air swept over the village, carrying with it a faint sound like 1,000 whispers inhaling at once. The villagers dropped to the ground, covering their heads. Even the boy's mother collapsed again, sobbing. But the boy stood frozen, because he heard something no one else heard. He heard the maw speak to him directly, a single word woven from countless voices, all harmonized into perfect clarity. "Stay." The command vibrated through him, but beneath the command he heard something else, a pull, a longing, a desire not for his body but for his voice, for his echo, for the shape of his fear. He understood, finally, horribly, why the maw had chosen him. Because he had cried out. Because he had been heard. Because his voice had cut cleanly through the village's indifference and traveled far across the hills like a beacon. And the maw had listened. It had learned from him. And now it wanted him back. His mother screamed at him from the ground, "Run!" He didn't move. The hills breathed again, and the boy realized something else, a truth that struck him colder than winter storms. The maw did not want to consume him. It wanted to become him. The ground rose beneath his feet in a gentle slope, nudging him toward the cave. The glow brightened, bathing him in cold light. The boy took a single step forward before he even realized he was doing it. His mother clawed at the dirt, dragging herself upright, reaching for him. "Don't!" she cried. "Don't listen!" He pressed his hands to his ears, but sound bent around his fingers, slipping inside anyway. He tried to turn away, but the pull in his chest tightened, like a hook. He tried to run, but his legs locked. The maw whispered again, this time in the voice of his father, the gentle, weary tone he remembered from early childhood. "Come home." The boy broke. Tears spilled down his face. He stumbled forward. The cave widened to receive him, its glow shivering with anticipation. His mother screamed his name with a rawness that tore through the air. For the first time, the maw did not echo it. The boy blinked. His mother's cry rang pure, uncorrupted, untouched. For a moment her voice was stronger than the hills, and that moment was enough. He turned and ran. He grabbed her arm, lifting her to her feet, dragging her down the road as the hills roared behind them. The cave snapped shut with a thunderous quake, then split open again with even more mouths tearing themselves into existence. The voices rose, furious, desperate, pleading, angry, every emotion the maw had ever heard from humanity flooding through its chorus. The boy and his mother sprinted across the field, stumbling, breathless, as the earth trembled, as the hillside reshaped itself in frustration. They did not stop running until the hills were distant shapes behind them, and the voices had thinned into faint echoes swallowed by the wind. But even then, they did not stop. Not until night fell, and their legs gave out beneath them in the next valley. The boy collapsed beside his mother beneath a tree, gasping for breath. She took his face in her hands, weeping silently. "You didn't answer," she whispered. "You didn't answer." He wanted to say he was safe, but he wasn't. He knew the truth. The maw had not chosen him because he cried wolf. It had chosen him because he understood fear so well that it echoed cleanly, because his voice reached more deeply into the hills than anyone else's, because he had become the signal it needed. And though they had escaped the hillside, the boy could still feel something faint beneath the ground. A hum, waiting, shaping itself to the memory of his voice, learning him even now. He pressed his ear to the soil, trembling. A whisper rose from deep below, quiet, patient, promising. The voice he heard was his own. "I'll find you."
Thank you for joining us in the world of Twilight Fables. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more.